Welcome to our program, Mr. Horsfall.
Hey, Daniel.
Ukrainian army has shot down 2 Russia's Su-30 fighter jets using maritime drones, according to the head of the Ukrainian military intelligence. This was done for the first time in the history of global conflicts. How can you assess this innovative approach towards destroying enemy's aircraft, and how can you also assess the state of the war in Ukraine on the ground?
Well, it just goes to show the innovation of the Ukrainian armed forces and their scientists. They've changed the face of warfare across the whole world with this new modern war, which is the drone war. Maritime drones have put a whole standard fleet back into Russian ports out of the Black Sea. So bringing down aircraft is just another step forward, and a very low cost step when you consider the very, very high cost of fast jets. As far as the war is concerned, the war is going very well militarily for Ukraine. It's going very well economically for Ukraine. The weakness that Ukraine has is on the world's media stage, where there seems to be an awful lot of investment from Russia who try to carry the message that they are winning the war and Ukraine is losing, when in fact it's completely the opposite. The holding the front lines is obviously very, very important. Behind the front lines, the logistical support, the whole system of warfare that Russia is relying on is falling apart. They're running out of men and materiel, and economically they're dying. Their oil is going down in price. They're struggling to sell it. They're going into their national wealth plan and their national wealth fund, and it's getting very, very, very difficult for them to maintain a war. So where the world needs to change, where the West needs to change, is by upping the political game on the media stage and letting people know how well it is going in real terms on the whole strategic front for Ukraine.
Also, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has declared 3-day ceasefire starting from May 8 to May 11. How can you assess this decision, and what are the main reasons behind this so-called several days ceasefire?
Yeah, well, somebody needs to explain it to the Russians that you negotiate a ceasefire, you don't declare one. So it's not a one-sided affair. You can't stop the boxing match when you're feeling a bit tired or you want to rest. And reasons for it are quite clear. He wants to have a period where his May celebrations for the Soviet victory in the Second World War are uninterrupted. And so he wants to take advantage of that by pretending that he wants some kind of ceasefire, when in fact he has no intention of ever supporting any kind of ceasefire. He simply wants his parade to be uninterrupted. And I like Mr. Zelensky's response to it. You have to be very, very careful. Don't go there because, and he's implying or saying very clearly that it's a legitimate target. And, the Russians have been striking Kyiv for a long, long time. They've been striking civilian targets for a long, long time. A military parade in the middle of Moscow is a legitimate target. The Russians are responding to this implied threat, and they are bringing a lot of air defenses into Russia, into Moscow, to protect those days. That is going to create weaknesses elsewhere on the front lines. It's going to make weaknesses in the air defenses in Crimea, possibly around Kerch Bridge. So every time they have to move something, they create a space somewhere else. I think Mr. Zelensky may or may not, but I think he might fly some drones, alert those air defenses, disrupt the parades. He doesn't have to use live ammunition. He doesn't have to actually attack anything. He's just got to have birds in the air. If he's got birds in the air, then they have to respond to the threat. And that's going to be symbolic and politically powerful. And it's going to get a lot of coverage across the world.
Also, recently, several days before and right now, Ukraine has launched another attack deep into Russian territory, into the Kursk region, trying to also isolate Russian troops in the village of Tetkino in the Kursk region. How can you assess this Ukrainian war effort and Russia's inability to properly to defend its territory, to try to also push Ukrainians back into the Ukrainian territory?
Yeah, in this drone war, it's becoming almost impossible for military groups to concentrate their forces. So nothing much is happening along the front line. You've got probes here, you've got company-sized attacks, you've got large numbers of casualties in the aggressive groups. Taking small pieces of Russian territory doesn't change the strategic situation as much as it changes the political situation. Putin does not like having Ukrainian forces on Russian territory. And so he's going to interfere with his military commanders and force much needed military resources into those areas. So it's a marvelous way of distracting and redirecting and fixing troops where they're not useful. So raiding into Kursk was a great move. It went much further than was expected. The troops that are still holding small amount of ground in Belgorod, again, it's a distraction. It pulls a huge number of Russian troops away from Donbass. I view it as very, very good Ukrainian commanders manipulating and moving the Russian troops, preventing them from organizing, preventing them from planning offensive operations that have any chance of success.
Also, recently, a high-rank Russian general has been killed in car bomb attack near Moscow. Last year, in December last year, another Russian general, Igor Kirillov, also has been killed by a bomb attack. How can you assess this assassinations or killing Russian generals inside Russia and the psychological influence on Russian chain of command after this assassinations deep inside Russia, so close to Kremlin, to Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, it's a very powerful message from Ukraine. It says, if you're cruel, if you commit war crimes, there's no hiding place for you. There's nowhere where we can't find you. We will find you, and we will destroy you. And that makes it much more difficult for these generals to have freedom of movement. It makes it difficult for them to control their armed forces as effectively because they have to be extremely careful. They need protection. And when they need protection at home, it sends a message to the people in Russia. It says, we're winning this war. Ukraine is winning this war. We can find you. We can get to you. We can get to your homes. And so you be very, very careful what you do, because in the long-term future, you're going to be standing in our courts and you're going to be asking our questions.
Let's also cover U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts to bring this war to the end. How can you assess the possibility of the end of this fighting this year, and how can you assess Donald Trump's efforts to reach a ceasefire deal?
Let me deal with the second one first. I don't think Donald Trump has any interest at all in bringing together an end to the operations. I don't think he understands how wars are. He doesn't understand the politics. He doesn't understand the military. If there's anything that he wants, it's to extort mineral resources from Ukraine. He wants to come away with some kind of political victory. There are discussions that he may have tried to plan some kind of new Yalta with Putin, with Z as the third party, in the sense that, the world will be divided between Trump's authoritarian America, Putin's authoritarian Russia, and Xi's communist China. Where does Europe stand in that? There must be some kind of idea in their head that they can eventually divide up and control Europe. And that's a severe concern where Trump is concerned. What was the first part of your question again, Daniel?
Sure. I asked about the possibility of the war ending this year because Trump is really confident about that. He's making these statements for a while. Every week we hear another statement from Trump suggesting the war will end in the recent days, in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, well, I don't think anybody believes that there's any chance of a cessation of violence in the coming weeks. There are two main reasons for that. One is that there's no benefit in it to either side. The only side that might have something to gain from it would be Russia, if they feel that they're definitely going to lose on the military front. As far as Ukraine's concerned, Ukraine is winning. Ukraine is winning economically and militarily. So there's nothing to gain there. Russia does not have any great advantage in calling an end to hostilities, especially Vladimir Putin. If he calls an end to hostilities, it looks like he's lost. It looks like he's failed. And the other side to it is that he now has a war economy. And with his war economy, he doesn't have the resources to switch back to a standard trading economy. His whole market, his whole infrastructure, his whole system of government trying to return from a war economy is going to struggle dramatically because it doesn't have any credit, it doesn't have trust, it doesn't have support from the rest of the world. So he either has to become a subservient party to China or he has to lose. If he loses, how are the Russian generals, how are the FSB going to respond to that? There's a chance that they will kill him, will remove him. So what does Putin have to gain from a ceasefire? I don't think he has very much to gain. We can't trust America anymore. They're not a reliable ally. We don't know from one day to the next what Mr. Trump will do. We've seen his appalling behavior in public towards Mr. Zelensky. Totally uncalled for, totally unjustified. The man is a selfish, ignorant bully, and he's bad for the West. He's bad for NATO. He's bad for Ukraine. I think the West, especially Europe and Ukraine, have to realize that whatever America does now, whatever the USA does now, they have to be prepared to carry on without them.
It is also interesting that according to the Washington Post, there are two groups near Vladimir Putin. The one group tries to convince Vladimir Putin, to persuade Putin to make the deal, just try to save Russia's economy after sanctions release. And the second group would like the war to go on. The second group of people, like generals and other officials, are convincing Vladimir Putin to continue the war instead, to capture even more Ukrainian land. From your perspective, what kind of group can win in this internal debate in Kremlin?
Well, that's a question I don't think we can answer. It depends who's prepared to take the chance of overthrowing power. Whether is it going to be the economists, is it going to be the people who hope for a rebuilding of the Russian economy, or is it going to be the nationalists, the right-wing authoritarian generals who will take over and make things worse? That's a big question. First of all, they've got to remove Putin from power. And Putin is extremely careful about who he allows to get close to him. He's as nervous of his own people now as he is of the enemy. So it's a difficult time. If there's going to be any kind of ceasefire leading to a peace resolution, it'll come from the collapse of the Russian economy. And at that point, that will be the driving force. In the meantime, the Ukrainian armed forces will hold the front line. They will win the drone war. They will bleed Russia of all its men and materiel and increase the likelihood of a collapse behind the lines, a collapse in Moscow.
Let's cover also the coalition of the willing. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been moving forward and discussing this idea with European allies. Also, according to the British newspapers, British Special Forces (SIS) have been put on high alert due to this military planning to deploy troops to Ukraine. Do you feel that the United Kingdom, France, and other European allies have enough troops to properly conduct such a large-scale operation in Ukraine?
I don't think they have enough mass at the moment, but they do have a great deal of air cover they could provide. They could create a no-fly zone over Ukraine if they combined their will and their resources in terms of air power. There's not enough mass, not enough numbers in the armed forces of Europe at the moment, and they need to. It would take several years to rebuild the numbers required to create enough soldiers to make a difference on the front lines in Ukraine. But they could make a huge difference in the air. As far as special forces concerned, they've already been providing training systems, programs for Ukrainian special forces. And the Ukrainian special forces have 3 years of active experience now and can probably teach the West a thing or two in that regard. I think that the top people, the top instructors have been on the ground in Ukraine quite a long time, or just over the border in Poland and Romania. So we need the West unite. We need Europe, Canada to unite and say we're going to do everything we can to ensure a Ukrainian victory. Because if there is not a victory and there's some kind of muddled together ceasefire or armistice, it's only a pause. It will be seen by Russia as a victory, as a stepping stone towards starting again. When you defeat a tyrant, you have to defeat them totally. You have to bring them down completely. You have to destroy them. If you don't destroy them, they just pause, they grow another leg, they grow another head, and they start again.
From your perspective, how can this war end?
It can end with the collapse of the Russian economy. It can end with the toppling of Putin as the national leader. It can end with a civil war in Russia. It needs the Russians to bring the end to the war. The Russian people, the Russian authorities, the people with power, the oligarchs, the Russian military, and the FSB. They're the people who can bring an end to it. The sanctions are working. They take a long time. The people of Russia are starting to realize that their men are not coming home and that prices are getting higher and higher and there's no money. And in some places, there's no food. So if there's going to be a peace in the next 6 months, I think it will come in the autumn when the weather changes, when the food is low, when the heating supplies are no longer there. That might be the crisis point.
But you're confident that if Vladimir Putin remains in power in Russia, the war will continue?
Yeah. I don't think Putin has anything to gain now. There is one option I've written about before, and that he could have withdrawn his troops back to the Russian border, declared a victory, whether it was true or not, and said that he'd achieved his mission and convinced the Russian people of that. That was a possibility. I'm not so sure that door is open for him anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Horsfall, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine.
Героям слава. Thank you very much.